What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? On today's episode, we are talking tackles worthy of a first-round draft pick, considering where the Steelers are picking at number 20 in this year's 2024 NFL Draft. All right, let's get straight into it. Tackles that are worthy of a first-round pick. Not only am I talk about names, I'm actually going to talk about some stats too that you may not have seen before. In fact, I don't think a lot of Steelers fans have seen these before. So, first round, as we know it right now, Steelers are picking at 20. They could move up to draft a tackle. They could move back to draft a tackle. It will be very dependent on how things are going, on the way the quarterback run is going, on Daniel Jeremiah's latest move. This is one of his latest moves, the sixth podcast with Bucky Brooks. They talked about, he gave an insight that he'd spoken to some GMs toward the back end of the draft. So if you look at the guys on the screen right now, we're talking KC most likely, San Francisco most likely, Baltimore, Detroit, the Bills, Arizona, for example. He talked about the fact that when he did a poll of GMs picking toward the back end of the first round, that he had said, if you had a top 5 pick, what would you do with it? And they were pretty much like, if you can't get the top 2 quarterbacks, you trade back. Unless you have a real need at tackle, and then you consider you take the top couple of tackles, but there's not too many of those. You may want to pick a wide receiver, but there's only one GM that Daniel Jeremiah mentioned this would be worth doing. Steelers are not in that back end of the first round. They're in the middle. They're in the draft purgatory, as my co-host on Steelers Global Perspective, Shannon White, likes to say. So who are my guys in terms of who do I think is actually worthy of a first-round pick as a tackle for the Steelers? Now, I'm going to bring them up all on the screen for you all at once. The first guy on my list is Talisi Fuaga out of Oregon State. Then it's Fashanu. Then it's Amaris Mims. Then it's J.C. Latham. Then it's Troy Fatanu out of Washington. Then Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. Tyler Guyton. And then Patrick Paul out of Houston. Now, I'm going to go into a couple of things. This is probably going to set off a whole different chain reaction for the listeners out there right now. For those of you watching who are new to the channel or for our TDU subs, if you're not a sub, think about hitting that sub button. All right, there's no Joe Alt. Yeah, I'm going to clear that up first thing. No Joe Alt. Joe Alt is a left tackle. The Steelers want to move Broderick Jones to left tackle. I don't see the value in moving, in drafting a bona fide left tackle. Also, Joe Alt could go as high as number 4 or 5, depending on where the draft is. The Steelers are not going to be able to get into the top 8 in all likelihood. And if they are, they're probably going wide receiver. They're not going to go tackle because they can get one of these guys in the top 16. They can even get one of these, a couple of at least 4 or 5 of these guys probably at 20. But by the time there's a run on quarterback, wide receiver, cornerback, and you also got a few other odd blokes, like in terms of Jared Verse, not that he's an odd bloke, but, an odd pick there in the defense. And then you've got guys like Jackson Powers Johnson thrown into the mix as well. Now, and a guy like Latu as well. Now, so I haven't picked Joe up. Talisi Fuaga actually is my top tackle prospect anyway, because he can play both sides, because he can play guard as well. He's actually my top offensive lineman. Then I go for Shanu, who is probably going to play left tackle in the NFL. I also think you can move him inside to guard. I think you can make him a right tackle if you really want to. Amaris Mims is pretty much now my top tackle on the board that's a specific right tackle. I actually have him ahead of J.C. Latham. That will surprise most people, but we're actually going to show you some stats as to why I'm kind of leaning that way as well. Then you've got Troy Fatanu out there, very agile guy, probably can play all 5 positions. I've heard rumors that he's been working out at center. I don't really like that there, but we'll see. Then Jordan Morgan and Tyler Guyton probably close out the guys that are really worthy of a first-round pick. However, I have put Patrick Paul there because I do believe that if you trade back with someone like, if KC offered you, which I've had come up in mock drafts, or San Francisco, because they could do with a tackle as well, and they draft one in the mid rounds in almost every single mock draft I do. If they could get their second pick, if you can get another third or a fourth with that, and maybe even a future pick in 2025, and they move up to 20, I think you consider taking it. If the first 4 guys on this list are off the board, because I think Fatanu will be anyway because of the versatility, right? So let's call it the top 5. These top 5 are off the board. You take the trade, and then you can go get a Patrick Paul. You can go get in the second round. You could draft him at 32 with a 5th-year option. You can get an Adonai Mitchell. You could get a falling Cooper DeJean, at cornerback, safety. There's multiple different moves you can make. But again, I think if presented with this challenge, it's one to consider, definitely. But Patrick Paul is probably a second rounder. So will probably be Morgan. I think he's a better prospect than Guyton. Just to be honest, I think Guyton could slip out depending if there's a run on wide receiver and cornerback. I think that he could totally slip out from that perspective. Now, let's also look at some. I said we'd look at some stats. So let's look at some stats as well. Now, if I look at, we're basically looking at PFF. Now, I know a lot of people out there don't like PFF. That's cool. But the reality with PFF is that they do passing grades, blocking grades that no one else does. And usually people know I'm a big sports reference, pro football reference in their college program is sports reference. I'm a big proponent of that. However, they don't do blocking grades. So it makes it very, very difficult when you're looking to assess players in college. There's also a number of other grades that they don't do. They do raw stats. Offensive lineman makes it really hard. So if we look at in terms of the offensive lineman and we look at just tackles, so I've filtered it by tackles. Draft year is this year. It's FBS only. It's in 2023 only. It's not multiple years. So that I'm just going to put that out there. The guys might have had worse years than last year. And I have made it 20 minimum block snaps of 20% of the most snaps in FBS last year, which was 1,008 snaps. I'd have to go pull in. We can pull up those guys, but basically, anyway, it is what it is. But they're the most snaps that were played in FBS last year. So look at overall offensive grade. That is everything that they did. Everything that they did, you get Joe Alt right now. So some people, it's going to be pretty small in front of your screen right now, but you get Joe Alt. So that's pretty. He's the top consensus guy in the draft. Kind of no surprise there. That's Joe Alt. Now, if you move down that list in terms of offensive grade, you get Talisi Fuaga, right? Now, Fuaga played most of his snaps at right tackle last year. So that's why it's kind of interesting when I say he's the top prospect for me in this draft with the Steelers, because that's where he played as that right tackle as well. And that's where the Steelers have the need to move Broderick over to the left tackle. Now, it is interesting as well when we look at the other guys on this list. John Von Foster's on this list. He's not on my list in terms of the first round guys. JC Latham is up there in number 6. Jordan Morgan's there in number 5. Patrick Paul there is there at number 7. Dominic Pooney is a third round draft pick who has been listed as guard or tackle. When he goes to the NFL, I think he can play either. He is there at number 8. Fashano's in there at number 11. And we'd have to go down. Maris Mims at 19. Graham Barton play tackle, but he's going to be an interior guy, whether it's center or guard in the NFL. He's in there at 18. Fatano's not there till 22. Christian Jones, my guy out of Texas, so I keep talking about. I think he's worthy of a day 2 pick. Possibly even scrapes into the back of the second round if there's a run on tackles. He's up there as well for overall offensive grade. And then we start to get smaller as we go down the list. I don't think there's anyone else in our top 10 that is there. All right, you look at run block grade. Fuaga, best run block grade in the college football last year, followed by Joe Alt, JC Latham at 6, Christian Jones at 14. I'm just going to keep throwing his name out there because other people are high on the kid out of Yale. Other people are high on Patrick Paul. Other people are high on Pooney. Other people are high. There's all different guys that are being brought up. But I'm just saying, Christian Jones, really, really top underrated tackle in this draft. Pooney's there at 19. We've got to go right down the list before we get to Fashanu at 29. Barton was at 25 out of context. I didn't put him in because remember I said this show is focused on tackles. Patrick Paul at 33. I think Amaris Mims is in the 50s, but not on this first page. Oh, yeah, there we go, 45. Satoa Lamia, who's way down on people's draft boards, like in the 5th and 6th round. He came in at number 43. He came in ahead of Mims. This is run blocking grade, remember? And so that also is determined a little bit by how well the running back does as well. Then you look at pass block grade. Patrick Paul, best pass block grade. And you can say it's PFF, but best pass block grade. And I'll go to sacks. I'll go to quarterback hits in a moment. Best pass block grade in all of FBS last year, followed by Joe Alt, followed by Pooney, followed by Fashanu, followed by Fatanu, followed by Morgan. And then we go the kid out of BYU that a lot of people are high on as well, Kingsley Salmataya. He's up there. JC Latham's in there, number 15. I think Maris Mims, 19. And then Christian Jones at 30. We're going to continue that train. Graham Barton, 29. Fuaga, 26. We'd have to go way down to get a few more of the other guys that I had on my list as well. But again, these are PFF grades. This is their pass block grade, is what it is. If you look at overall sacks, with the least sacks allowed, that's where it gets interesting. So I'm going to show you, this is 20%. As I said, 20% of the snaps, total snaps. I'm going to show you 80% though, because things change pretty substantially. So Puni didn't allow a sack. Fashanu didn't allow a sack. Fuaga didn't allow a sack. Amaris Mims didn't allow a sack either. Christian Jones only allowed 1 sack. Tyler Guyton allowed no sacks. This is why these guys are ranked so highly. Jordan Morgan, I think, had 2, but I'll have to pull one up. We look at quarterback hits. The least amount of hits allowed. 0 for Fashanu, 0 for Puni, 0 for, so 0 for Fashanu, 0 for Puni. I think then in terms of quarterback hits, Amaris Mims allowed 0. This is why he's my top right tackle outside of Fuaga. Jordan Morgan only allowed 1 quarterback hit, but he did allow 2 sacks. So just interesting in how PFF count those stats there. Just one to keep in mind of. So that's kind of interesting when you look at that as well. If you look at overall pressures allowed, least in the league, least in college football last year was Amaris Mims, only allowing 1 pressure the entire season. That's why I know he hasn't played a bulk of games, but he only played 7 games last year. Hasn't played a lot in his college football career, but it's huge stats, huge numbers from him, or lack thereof in this case, which is a good thing. Joe Alt is in there. He only allowed 5 pressures. Puni with 5. Puni with 7. Puni with 8. Paul with 9. Fashanu with 10 pressures. Christian Jones only 11 pressures. Graham Barton allowed 11 pressures. Fuaga allowed 12 pressures. Guyton with 12 as well. So most of these guys are pretty similar in the total stats that you'll see. You look at the best left tackle. Fatanu played the most left tackle snaps. He only played 1 at guard. So a lot of people talk about him kicking inside, but he didn't really play a lot there. You also look at, in terms of who played the most at right tackle, you've got Rosengarten. Christian Jones played 904. Fuaga played in there, but they played less games because you got to remember guys that played in postseason and the regular season. And that's why I want to go to, let's go 80%, and we're just going to go regular season, right? Regular season to average this out so that you get a good feeling of like, who are the guys that play the most amount of snaps? Because these are the guys that are going to be more of the starters. And this is where I thought it was really interesting in terms of the sacks that were allowed versus ones that weren't. So you look at the sacks overall. Christian Jones allowed 0. This is 80% of the snaps. Christian Jones allowed 0. Puni only allowed 0. Lumia, who's out of Utah, who I talked about earlier, he only allowed 0. JC Latham allowed 1 sack. And remember, Amaris Mims didn't play 80% of the snaps for Georgia. Jordan Morgan allowed 2 sacks. So this is kind of interesting when you look at overall of the guys that played 80% of the snaps. Patrick, Paul, Puni, Fatanu, and Morgan are the top 4 guys on this list. Fuaga doesn't feature, and Mims doesn't feature as well. JC Latham is up there at number 8. I don't think Fuaga falls into this list. I think he played 70% of the snaps. So this is kind of pretty interesting when you actually overall look at it. If you look at the least amount of hits, again, we talked a few about those guys, but Puni is the only one that is probably a day 1 or day 2 pick that allowed 0 hits. That's kind of interesting as well. Jordan Morgan 1, Patrick Paul 1. So we talked about a few of those stats. Now, if I go back to overall blokes that played 20% of the snaps, so we can bring in a couple of guys like Mims and Fuaga that have got these top round grades. You look at the least amount of penalties. Unfortunately, Amaris Mims is the only guy on that list with 0 penalties that we're talking about here. So again, this is why Mims, when I go into my sort of guys that I really rate, is that I have him rated so highly as like my number 3 guy, outside of Fashanu, because Fashanu does deserve the credit that he can play left tackle, purely because when you look at it, Mims is just his blocking grades, his performance last year in the FBS was really, really goddamn good. And so that's kind of what it is. And you look at it as well from Amaris Mims, You look at what he's played last year, he only played 297 snaps. You do have to keep that in mind when you're talking about him. When you're talking about overall right tackle, though, like as I say, Fuaga kind of really stands out for you. But it's also about competition. Remember, he played at Oregon State. He didn't play at Georgia or Alabama or Texas or Washington that went deep into the playoffs. So that is something to remember as well. But the one thing that I guess I wanted to, going back into the guys that I put up on the board, is that these guys, this is a very, very strong tackle class. There's guys that can play both sides. There's guys that can play right side only. There's guys that are more better with your left side. Then there's guys that can play almost all 5 positions in Fatanu, in 4 positions in Fuaga as well. So that's kind of interesting in terms of teams looking for versatility, teams just looking to get better. It's a reason why Fatanu could go really early in this draft, a lot earlier than what people realize. Seahawks could use him in a number of different spots, particularly if he is working out at center. I think that's why he has, because he's probably hoping JP to take a JPJ spot. Graham Barton is a guy that is not on my list right now because he's been projected so far interior. Remember, I said offensive tackles, but he played tackle in college. He's probably going to play guard in the NFL, but he's quite possibly could play center with the workout. So really interesting situation that Steelers are in. But you let me know if you were GM, give me rank your top 3 in the comments, your top 3 tackles that you'd take in order and what order you'd take them. And even if you want to, let me know if you trade up to get one of these blokes and where you trade up to as well. But anyway, I just thought this is important to get out. We're going to get a number of other positions out. Not every position is worthy of taking in the first round, but I wanted to preview my guys that are available in the first round that I think, everyone's going to be available in the first round until they're picked, but the tackles worthy of a first-round draft pick. That was the focus of today's show. Hope you enjoyed it. More to come on Steelers Touchdown Under and in our Steelers War Room series. As always, go Steelers.